Good morning. Good morning. This is Biniam on the Checkin In podcast. I am your host. Today is the 9th of November, 2021, and you are listening to the 92nd episode of the Checkin In podcast. Good morning, Ollie. Nice to see you, my friend. How are you? We are live streaming on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and of course, the recording goes on Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify as well. This is the podcast that I have taken a commitment to in the last few months, more so by way of self-care for me first and foremost, and then by way of extension to share more of my life with you guys and how I think and process through things. I share those experiences as well with you guys and encourage you to consider how you can bring some application into your own context as well. There are three key pillars that I love to focus on this podcast. Number one, we like to focus on awareness. Two, kindness. And three, happiness. Those are the three key pillars that sort of sustain and keep us focused on this trajectory that we're on. These are the three key things. If I had to scintillate all of my experience in life down to three main areas that I find really important and helpful, these three things are the ones that I found tremendous benefit in applying myself to. And so those three key reasons, again, reasons of why I go about it this way is one, knowing yourself, becoming aware of yourself is super critical to knowing how you're going to engage with whatever you're facing or embracing in life. In the absence of knowing yourself well enough, I find that we are more likely to go on deviations and tangents and things that just don't serve us well. We fumble a lot more in the absence of awareness of who we are and how we're wired. And then from becoming aware, we move on to the kindness piece. The kindness piece, which is also really critical because we are ruthless with ourselves ongoing. So how can we be kind and patient? And in the process, make space for happiness as we process all other emotions. So those are the three key pillars that I thrive on in life. I want to share those with you guys. I want to see model for you how I process my way through those three key pillars. And I do so by way of addressing self-reflection questions. Today's question has to do a lot with why I even do this podcast in the first place. Now, I said just a few moments ago, hello, how are you? Nice to see you guys coming in there. One of the key reasons I do this is not for your benefit first and foremost, but for mine, for my own benefit. And I find that applied when I put myself rigorously through a series of self-reflection questions. I give time to sort of devote to analyzing the question, why it's a really helpful question or not, and how I want to move forward in reference to that question. So that's really important. So I do this for me first and foremost. This is to help me grow in this discipline of applying myself rigorously to what does it look like for me to become a better version of me. So along those lines, self-care is one of the primary reasons why this podcast exists for my own self. I'm happy if you benefit that way too. I'm thrilled if that's the case. But first and foremost, what does self-care look like for me and how can I apply myself to it? Part of that for me entails a component of accountability. Accountability as I share my experiences with others. That's you guys coming along and watching and listening and asking and engaging. I appreciate all that. And that helps get me a little bit further in my own experience and my own commitment to this aspect of self-care. So today's question has a lot to do with self-care. In fact, it has self-care right in the question. Hello, Mickey, how are you? I'm good. Crody, I am not driving Uber at the moment. I'm still on the platform, but I'm just taking a break from Uber right now while I find some other means of income to help me get my vehicle back on the road, insurance-wise and so on. So I'm still going to be driving for Uber, yes. Hello, CT. How are you? Nice to see you guys coming in. Welcome to the Checkin In podcast. Glad to have you guys here. Today's question we're answering is how can you bring more self-care into your day? How can you bring more self-care into your day? This is one of those questions I left to the end because I did not know how to answer this question. And I still sort of struggle with this question, but I think I answered a little part of that question, even as I gave you the reason, the être for why this podcast exists, primarily because this is my way of growing in my own experience by applying self care. These questions I answer for my own self. I put it in this format of a podcast so that I can get through them, and so I don't procrastinate, and I have that sense of accountability. This is one of those implementations for me of what self care looks like. And so that's why I commit myself as I do to this series of questions for the last few months. And I found it tremendously beneficial. This is not a podcast yet that is thriving and has a massive following, not at all. But I believe strongly in the principle for why this podcast exists. So even if it's just a handful of you friends who are listening in, or whether it's millions of people, I still want to approach this discipline in a very intentional way of saying, here's what I want to accomplish as I engage in this process. So yes, how can we bring more self-care into our day? This is a question in relation to our well-being, a self-reflection question to ask: how are we considering our well-being with reference to applying self-care to ourselves? What is self-care, by the way? Self-care, in my estimation, is how we intentionally, and I think that word intentionally is really, really important. If it's haphazard, if it's by way of a fluke, I'm not sure if it really counts as self-care. Self-care, I think, in its definition, should incorporate the word intention or intentionality. It takes intention to be able to apply self care in one's life. It takes consideration to apply self care to yourself. It takes awareness of yourself. There's that first pillar of this podcast: awareness of ourselves. It takes a high commitment, a familiarity, a high uh, progression in understanding how aware one is of themselves to be able to apply self care to oneself. And so that's really important. In the absence of which, in the absence of which, we find ourselves in a different zone. If we don't know ourselves well enough, we don't know how to apply self care. It's kind of like saying something hurts in my body and I need help, but I don't know how to describe what's going on in my body. If that's what your report is to the doctor, he's going to ask you some more information. He's going to say, I don't have much to go on, and this isn't really helpful, and I need some more to be able to go. So, um, yeah, that's a really important component of knowing oneself, because when you know yourself well enough, you can be super specific. You can be super specific by way of saying to the doctor, Doctor, my pinky finger hurts right on the tip. It has this kind of a sensation, a prickly sensation, and I don't know what's going on. Now, this is really helpful intel. This awareness piece is really helpful for the doctor that you're interacting with. All of a sudden, you're going from your whole body where something's wrong to a fine point that he can focus on and say, now I can do something about that. In the same sense, if we're not aware of ourselves, we don't know how to apply that care to ourselves. We don't know what kind of self care, what form of self care is really going to be important to serve ourselves well. For example, if you are an introvert and you feel like you don't, and you're unaware that you're an introvert and you're looking for ways of self care, and you go and try to find self care in the midst of a sea of people who are partying, that's probably not going to serve you well. Perhaps somewhere quiet and slower pace or something similar would serve you much better. That only comes if you're self aware. If you're self aware of how you're framed, how you're wired, and what really makes sense for you. So that's really important, I would say, that awareness piece of knowing how to understand what we need and how to advocate for it. That takes intentionality. To apply self-care to ourselves, I'm stating, necessitates that we're intentional about that opportunity to apply self-care. If we're not intentional about doing so, what happens then is we sort of coast in a direction, and any self-care that we do experience is perchance. It's a fluke. And if we go a long time without applying self care, it's like driving a vehicle that needs a tune up, especially by way of, let's say, engine oil. If your engine oil is running low and your engine is not getting the lubrication that it needs, your engine is going to break apart. In the same way, you're that engine. If you're not applying the oil of self-care to yourself, you are eventually going to snap and break in a way that is going to be devastating. So, know yourself well. Know what it is that serves you well by way of self-care, and then intentionally applying that to yourself is really important, because when you apply it intentionally, that touches the second pillar of our podcast, and that's kindness. Kindness to ourselves. Kindness to ourselves means that we are being gracious, we are being patient with ourselves as we grow into a version that we're aiming for that reflects who we want to be and how we want to get there. That's really important. So, that kindness piece enables you to be able to deal well with yourself, to be able to attend well to your soul, to your body. That's a really good component. Self care helps you get to a better place so that you are treating yourself with kindness. So, the awareness piece and the kindness piece usually go super well together. And the happy outcome, as you apply those two together, is the happiness piece. Happiness, whereby you're able to process a lot of the things that need to be processed in the other emotions and feelings that are legitimate, that are necessary, and that need their space and time to be expressed. But as you go through them, and a lot of those that people experience are the uncomfortable ones, and they just kind of try to avoid them. But when you make time to go through those other emotions, you make space available internally for this beautiful expression that we call happiness, that we love to experience and that most of us strive to try and get to. That's an important piece too. So, are you seeing how all of this plays really well together, my dear friends? Are you seeing how all of this coalesces to come to this combination that really does serve us well? Self care. Well, how can you bring more self care into your day? We talked about self care as, or at least we define it as, that intentional application of things, dynamics, circumstances, scenarios to yourself that is going to serve to rejuvenate you, that's going to serve to bring life back into you, that's going to serve to enhance your healthiness, your mental health, your emotional, your physical health. All those components are super important. And it has to be an intentional application of that self care that is uniquely specific to you based on how well aware you are of what works for you and how you're going to apply it to be able to show kindness to yourself. That is a really important coalescing of things going on there. I think the most important part of all that would be the word intentionality. Intentionality, whereby you're like, I'm not going to coast through this. I'm actually going to move into this on purpose. One of the phrases I really enjoy saying is live life on purpose. Live your life on purpose. What does it look like for you to live your life on purpose? To be able to be intentional as much as you can, moment by moment through your day, so that the decisions you're making, the experiences that you're navigating, the choices you're making, all of those are done on purpose, given your awareness of yourself and how you're showing kindness in the process of it all. I like how all that comes together. I was just processing all that, and it, as I listened to it, I'm like, that sounds really good. That resonates with me, and I'm not sure if it resonates with you, but feel free to throw your questions in there if you are still sort of puzzled by how I made those connections along the way. So that is some of the background to our question. The question, again, my dear friends, is how can you bring more self care into your day? How can you intentionally bring more self care as a way of showing kindness to yourself in your day? And we said that in the absence of showing your self care, um, eventually you are going to be depleted. Eventually you are going to fall apart. Eventually you are going to be dismantled. And so it's a good question to consider. And I think I struggled with it because this is one of those things that my mind doesn't necessarily give much time to. And so I'm going to be benefiting from this question by asking it of myself and then considering what I would do, what I'm doing already, but what I can also continue to do. My mind doesn't really focus much on applying this question because by nature, I would consider myself a workaholic. I push myself, I work, 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 and I get a lot of work done in little amount of time. And I'm still learning how to have a good balance of work slash play slash life, all that kind of stuff. So if I didn't, for example, get together on an ongoing basis with my friends every week to spend time together, I wouldn't make time for it. I wouldn't make time for hanging out with friends. So that helps implement in my schedule that importance that I'm going to make sure that that's not skimped out on, for example. If I didn't have that, I'd be in trouble. I would totally have a bad balance, right? I could take my self care a little further and say, I'm not going to depend on external factors to kind of jumpstart me into expressions of self care. But what could I do in my own personal context, on purpose, intentionally, to redeem the time to apply self care to me? I would love to understand what that looks like. And I'm not sure what that looks like yet. But I have some ideas. I have some ideas. In reference to sleep, sleep is, I think, a really important expression of self-care for me. I've lived many years where I have neglected sleep, not because I didn't enjoy it. I love sleeping. I love to sleep. But I just had a lot more work on the go. And so I would sacrifice sleep so I can keep working a little bit more. And so I I don't know. I've just gotten to a place where I'm used to going on about 2 hours, 3 hours of sleep, and I can still keep going. People who interact with me and are often kind of surprised about how much energy I bring to my workplace, to my tasks at hand, the enthusiasm I have. Like even in the mornings, I'm relatively full of life. Here I am. Last night, I only had 2, 3 hours of sleep. I was watching a movie with my sister on the couch, and then I fell asleep. And then I woke up a couple hours later, like around 11:30 last night, and I was up since then all night. Now, I was able to do some work while I was up, which is good, but that's again an area that I'm working on, and I didn't do very well last night. I should have, tried getting back to sleep, but I didn't, and I kept going. I kept going and pushing myself, and here I am this morning. I'm definitely feeling a little bit sleep deprived, but I'm not sure if you can tell. Sometimes my close friends can tell just by looking at me and saying, "Biniam, your eyes look tired. Have you been resting?" So I don't get away as well with those who know me super well. So, and then I had a bit of a headache this morning as well. So, what did I do this morning before I came on the podcast here? I jumped in the shower and I stood under the hot shower for quite a while. It was nice. It was an expression of self care. And why did take a shower instead? Because my mom, I'm not sure if it works, but I just did it because it reminds me of my mom. She said, if you have a headache, go take a shower and it should help. And I guess it helped her. It doesn't really help me, but it still reminds me of my mom. But it was still nice to have that time to spend under the hot shower, just kind of taking it in. So that was nice. Expression of self care. But I would say one of my top ones of how I can bring more self care into my day is more discipline in my sleep schedule, more commitment to adhering to a sleep schedule that serves my body well. So just because I can get away with a few hours of sleep does not mean I should be doing that. It doesn't mean I should be cutting corners, right? I should, in essence, be, how can I say, I should be, in essence, making responsible decisions that serve my body well. And I didn't do that last night. I didn't do that. I totally took advantage of my ability to get away without having much sleep, and it didn't serve me well. And so I'm aware of that. So I want to consider how to be able to implement more discipline in my sleep schedule to ensure that I'm not going into those old patterns whereby I am cutting corners so that I'm being driven by things that don't necessarily necessitate I should be letting them like navigate my life. sleep is an important one for me. Number two, another area that I could be expressing self care to myself is in the area of, I'm going to say, meditation. I don't take time out to meditate in my day yet. I think that's another expression that would be really helpful for me to apply myself to so that I can look after myself well enough. I don't do it yet because I'm usually go, go, go. I'm usually in that zone of, okay, how can I maximize as much as I can? How can I maximize my productivity? How can I get things done? How can I, um, how can I, in essence, be in that accomplish mode? How can I get things done ongoing because I feel that that will validate me in some way? And so, meditation, I think, would be a really helpful one just to remind myself that I'm going to unplug from the world, unplug from my devices, unplug from the go, go, go pressure of getting stuff done to attending to what is more important. And that is also taking time to think and reflect and ponder and challenge myself and process and all those other things that my mind needs to do. So it's, in essence, meditation would be a way for me to enable my mind or give my mind permission to take a bit of a vacation on a regular basis. I don't do that yet. Why? Because I'm like, I got to keep going. It's kind of like those individuals who are on a road trip. And for them, it's just all about getting from point A to point B in the least amount of time. That's me. Contrasted with the individual who slows down and says, hey, let's pull over there and explore that trail. Let's take a picture by this picturesque landscape behind us. Let's take a moment and smell those roses and or flowers by the side of the highway. Those individuals have been able to move through life in this way where they don't feel compelled to go, 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 go. Instead, they're like, I'm going to go. But when the moment calls for it, I'm going to pause a moment and reflect. And they'll take time out to figuratively smell the roses. What does that look like for me? By way of meditation, to be able to do the same. It's to be able to say, I'm going to put on hold all those things that I feel pressure to get done and to get out of that work, and just productivity mode. If I can just put those on hold and then take a moment and say, so let me sit with myself in silence and think what comes to my mind, process what are some of the things in my life right now, things that are engaging my imagination, or goals that I would like to set, or reflections that I need to have, memories that I want to dwell on, like all these kind of things that could give me time just to rest and take a break in my mind so that it's not on that rat-a-tat-tat mode of getting stuff done. That's an important thing, I think. And one other way that I want to challenge myself to specifically apply self-care. I don't do these things by the like there's so many other things I do, but there's some critical things I think that would serve me well that I'm not doing yet. Again, because of this season of life that I'm in and the pressures that I'm navigating. I'm like, oh, I got to get stuff done, but what does it look like for me to still exercise self-care? So I'm working on this too, guys. I don't have this all well put together. And then the final thing I want to see by way of application in the self care department for me is I also want to take time out to give not only my mind a break through meditation, but also my body a break, whether it's sitting on the couch and watching Netflix, which I really enjoy doing, or whether it's something else, whether it is me going for a walk. You know how much I love walks? Love to go for walks, and I don't do that as often as I'd like. So, what would it look like for me to go on walks in the neighborhood? I started really well a couple of weeks ago, and I kind of fell through on it, and so I'm gonna have to consider how to get back into that. And that is an important part for me. Considering how I can take time out to go for a walk and enjoy that walk, not like a power walk, but a leisurely walk where I'm taking it easy on whichever street I'm walking or trail I'm walking. I'm watching and taking in my surrounding environment and seeing the homes. I'm open to pausing, like those road trippers who would stop on the side of the road to smell the roses, what would that look like for me to do the same? To look at a home that has fantastic architecture, to explore a new neighborhood through walking, to appreciate some other elements that enable me um, to remember that there's a lot of beauty in life worth noting, reflecting, and appreciating if we would only just but take a moment to savor. That's another good way of saying it. I think self care for me is more a way of enabling me to savor life, to enhance my appreciation of life because I'm slowing down to take note of those things that are important. That would be really critical and important for me. So, what would that look like? So there's a few different ways. One I was saying is in the area of sleep. I am doing the pits here, but I'm going to exercise self care to myself, saying, hey, I'm still in this old mode or way of thinking that I don't want to have indicative of the way I navigate life in general. So even now, as I think about it, how can I apply kindness to myself and saying, I'm not where I want to be yet, but I can still pursue what that looks like. I can do that. I can make that happen. This is a way whereby I want to exercise and say, this is important. This is important for me to be able to experience what this looks like, especially as I apply kindness to myself, not beating myself saying, man, why am I still struggling this way? I'm such a failure. No, I'm not even going to go there. I'm going to say to myself, Binyam, you're still able to make this happen. You still have the intuitive know-how to apply. You have the conviction that it's necessary. I don't have to convince you of that. And you have the power to implement it. So what does that look like for you, Beniam? To not skimp out on sleep so that your body can have the rest that it needs and that you're serving it well. You're not depleting it. You're not running it dry. That's an important part. This is how I want to show kindness to my body. I want to show kindness to my body again by way of taking leisurely walks because that's a beautiful thing for me to do. I've worked hard with my body for so many years. What does it look like for me to go on cruise mode now and enjoy some experiences in life just by a simple extension of making time to go for a walk? I want to do that more often. And then, how can I show kindness to my mind? How can I show kindness to my mind whereby I can say, hey, don't forget, in addition to sleep, meditation is also a beautiful way to be able to enable your mind to savor your existence, to be able to reflect on what you're going through, to be able to rejuvenate and bring some imagination and creativity to this zone mentally, intellectually, so that you can continue doing what you love doing and not have to worry about like sort of cracking it because you're being really inflexible with it. Friends, these are three things that I wrestled to come to the conclusion, and I'm really thrilled with my answers. I appreciate this question. Like I said, I wrestled with this question for quite some time. I didn't want to answer it. I was like, I don't want to answer that question because I know it's going to make me think really carefully about areas that I'm neglecting. And that's one of the things that self-reflection questions do. They give you those insights into areas where you're like, I need to bring attention to this. I need to apply myself here. What does that look like for you, though, my dear listeners? Self-care. Do you do well? Are you struggling in it like I am? And if you're struggling, what are those things you identify that need to be addressed and then implemented? What kind of steps are you intentionally going to take to bring some of those into fruition in your life? I'd love to hear, because in the absence of these reflections, we sort of coast in the wrong direction. We coast in the wrong direction where we are spiraling downwards instead of growing upwards. We only get a lifetime, unless you believe in reincarnation. But we get this one life to try and make the best of it while we can. It's worthwhile. You're worthwhile. I can say you're worthwhile because as you're listening to this, we have a purpose for why we are engaging as we are. You're listening to this because you're saying, I want to see more purpose implemented in my life. And so you have something that you need to accomplish, but it doesn't happen in the absence of self-care. Tend to yourself today as I go ahead and tend to me. Love you guys. Thanks for joining in. Talk to you tomorrow.